Drew, thanks for joining me. It's amazing how many people have reached out from my LinkedIn messaging, my posting. You stood out with your story and you gave me lots and lots of detail of your life. So I'm very intrigued to hear more from you. One thing you did tell me is that when people hear about your situation, they have an expectation of your story, maybe even a stereotype. But what you've told me, that's not really what it is. So what is it?
Yeah, I think it's pretty natural for folks to just hear a little bit about my story and think, oh, this is, somebody who was born with a disability and has, overcome adversity and has really, gotten themselves to where they want to be in life. And I think that's correct on a certain level. I also think there's more to that story. And that's what I'm excited to talk with you about today is, I think for myself, the common theme from day one in my life has really been about making decisions. And decisions are, something we make 100 times a day or more, whether we know it or we don't. But I think for me, what's been really paramount is making the harder decisions at certain points in life. And that provides you sort of those fork in the road situations where you could go one way and have it be easy for yourself and for myself. I've kind of always chosen the harder path because that's just what's comfortable for me. That's what keeps me moving and keeps me excited in life.
And not to dwell on your disability, but can you just break down of what you have and how
Yeah,
that has affected you in your body?
yeah, no, absolutely. So I was born with a neuromuscular disability called spinal muscular atrophy. It is a neurodegenerative disease that affects your motor neurons. And so, I wasn't producing a specific protein that was part of the genetic disorder. And so, what ultimately happens is your brain is unable to communicate with those motor neurons that fire your muscles. So for me, from day one, I have been unable to walk. I've used the power wheelchair since age 3 years old. I have a twin brother who is perfectly normal, no disability. I have a sister as well, and there's none of this disability in all of our family. So it's one of those just interesting genetic things that happens. But for myself, what it really looks like day to day is driving a power wheelchair, needing full help with all aspects of my personal care. So thinking about, feeding, helping somebody, having somebody help me cut my foods, get me dressed, shower me, get me to where I need to be, etc. That is just daily life for me, and it has been since day one. I think for myself, the other interesting thing about this disease is it's progressive. And so the way that I try to describe that is, you're losing muscle every day, but you might not notice it every day. It's something where for myself anyway, there's been moments where I look back and go, I can remember when I used to be able to do this or I used to be able to do that. And now I have to do things differently. For example, I've changed my diet because I used to be able to chew beef and loved steak. And, as I got older and my muscles got weaker, that was not something that became enjoyable for me. It was more of a workout. And
Mm.
so I've just adapted to that, right? And changed to more of a pescatarian based diet, things that are just generally easier for me to eat, but still give me the same nutrients. So hopefully that kind of gives you a high level overview.
But yeah, that definitely does. Um, Not to dwell on childhood, but like high school time when I guess you're probably a little becoming a little more aware and educated and like have a better understanding of your situation. What were the things that really stood out that you noticed with your disability that like the big changes, I guess? Because probably when you're a kid, you don't really notice those things as much because you're
Right.
not as aware. What was like the first couple of things that maybe really, I guess, startled you in a way would be the right word?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really interesting word, startled. Because you don't really realize it in the moment, and when you look back, you're like, "Wow, that should have actually startled me." I think one of the most, probably the funnier ones that people can relate to, maybe not you, but, folks who have hair, love to make their hair look a certain type of way. And one of the things that I used to be able to do, you know, part of my morning routine was I could brush my own teeth, I could get my hair done, and I started not being able to lift my arms higher than my eyes at that point, and needed to have somebody start helping me with my hair every day. It sounds small, but when you're in high school and you want to fit in and you want to look good, and you want to be the best that you can be every day, that was something that I had to adapt to. That definitely startled me, having to start learning about how I communicate things, like which way I want my hair parted, or how I want it washed, et cetera, et cetera. That to me was something that was probably more startling than it needed to be at the time. I think another thing is being able to hold like a glass of water. I think for most people, we reach for a glass of water with one hand, and I used to be able to do that as well. But then having to start, thinking about using both of my hands to pick up a glass of water and using my elbows, propped up on a table or some type of a surface to give me that leverage to then get the water to my mouth. Those little types of loss, they do something to you, I think, mentally and emotionally on a certain level. Because, you start to think like, well, if this is affecting me just picking up water and I'm in high school, what is my life going to look like, 20 years from now? Will I be able to do any of this on my own? Will I have to have somebody, sitting next to me everywhere I'm at to feed me? And those were the types of things that were swirling with me at that time where I was like, huh, what is it going to take for me to continue enjoying life, to continue surviving, and thriving in the way that up until that point, I really pretty much had.
Yeah. Um, with all the things you've gone through, have you gotten better at not dwelling on them as much and just
Yeah,
the
yes, I would say definitely. I think there was a certain point in my life, and I'm thinking back, it would probably happen for me in college, where I kind of just realized that mindset is the only variable that we can each control. Every morning we wake up and we have the ability to take that first breath. I think for me that having a mindset shift probably in college was the biggest change for me. I don't think I was ever somebody who felt sorry for myself or dwelled on it too much, but there was a certain thing that clicked for me in college. And I think it was when I started to really gain a lot of just independence in my day to day. I was no longer at home. I didn't have my parents taking care of me every day. I was really building my own life and my own routines and figuring things out through trial and error, sometimes by fire. I think for me, that was a major point in my life where I just said, you know what, like I'm gonna just keep moving as far as I can, as well as I can, doing as good as I can. And there's gonna be days that are harder than others, and I think that's just the reality. But when you can kind of shed that off and just understand that there will be good days ahead, I think that for me is what keeps me going.
who was it harder for, you or your parents, when you transitioned into college life? I imagine it's pretty tough for them
Wow,
to let you
yeah.
go on your way.
Yeah, one of the most interesting days of my life was the day my dad dropped me off for freshman year. It was just him and I that went down to I went to the University of Illinois in Champaign, and my car was full. Like so much stuff in my car. Think about all the things a normal college kid takes to school. Plus, for me, there were some other, machines and things that I used in my daily life that added to that stack. So we got there, unloaded the van. He got me settled. We went and had some food, and watching him walk away was like one of those moments where I'm sure we both had just so many thoughts going on. But I don't know if it was harder or easier for. I think for me, it was probably easier because I was like, yay, I'm at college, like, let's go. I'm sure for them, they were like, what is going to happen? Like, um, but I was in a good spot, right? I was at a school that had like the best disability program in the world, probably. They were always competing with UC Berkeley for that spot. But really, it's their entire physical environment from every school building to every cafeteria was designed with people with disabilities in mind, which, as you can imagine, is very unique because the world around us is absolutely not designed that way. Um, so I think for them, they were probably both, excited, but also a little terrified.
Just want to go back before we go forward.
Yeah, yeah.
You your your family, you guys middle class, doing well for most of your up upbringing, or did you guys have any issues at any point? I know you mentioned something about like the 2008 crash. Did How did that
Yeah.
affect your family?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you kind of circling back. So, I am from a family that cares deeply about each other. Um, my parents are without a doubt like the, pillars of what has made me the person I am today. We came from a pretty comfortable upbringing. When we grew up, like when I was born in Minneapolis. We were born in a suburban Minneapolis home on a golf course. Both of my parents were full-time career workers. My dad, an attorney, and my mom was in marketing. And generally we did really well. And then 2008 hit, to your point. The world changed overnight, and the industry that my dad was involved with um, completely changed overnight. You can imagine probably the most hard hit industry that there was during the financial crisis. And, for me, I think what I've learned through that was nobody's gonna hand you anything, and waiting for somebody else to do so is just a bad bet. You have to go advocate for yourself. You have to, change and adapt when things just don't work out, or things that are outside of your control happen, and you're faced with those situations where you're left making very difficult decisions for your family. And so I feel like for myself and our family, it was much like millions of other people in the United States where our daily family life changed a bit. My mom went um out of the workforce when we moved to Chicago area. So around the year I was like 4 years old. That was also around when my sister was born and was a baby. And I think, they made some decisions around who was going to be home with the kids versus having a nanny. And, I'm sure that was a very difficult decision for them at the time. But when the 2008 crisis happened, sort of that dynamic flipped where my mom went back to work and my dad was out of work. So, there was a big change for us, but things worked out, and I think that's another sort of piece that I learned from that is that as long as you stay focused, you continue to put out what you're looking to get back in life. I think things things definitely will work out for you. And I try to embrace a lot of that, in my day to day whenever I'm having a hard time or, some job ends for me. It's, just trying to keep faith that things will work out. And that to me was sort of that biggest lesson that I learned through that sort of time of my life.
Hmm. Are you religious in any way?
I was raised Catholic.
Okay.
So I'm not like a church going person. I'm definitely spiritual. I don't believe in maybe a traditional God, if you will, but I do believe that there's something that's around us and driving us and makes us all interconnected.
I know that was just random.
Yeah.
I always like to ask that sometimes. It
Eh,
just intrigues me. Okay, go back to college.
yeah,
So
yeah.
you're at, like, it sounds like number one college for your situation. Did you take advantage of everything they offered, or how did you navigate? I guess like the perfect
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah, so let me like kind of set the scene for you in your head. So this is imagine you're at a university with 80,000 school students, and probably another 40,000 in faculty. So it's a massive campus. And the dorm, they built a brand new dorm there probably 4 or 5 years before me. And there was this disability program that was being run on campus, and it had been there since the early 70s. Um, and so they were given the opportunity to be a part of designing this new dorm where they would actually own or sort of inhabit the first floor of the dorm, the ground floor, and everything you can imagine in the dorm space was designed for somebody with a disability. And it could be any type of physical disability. So, on the ceiling in my dorm room, there was a lift track system. So if you were somebody who, was a little bit larger and you used a sling, to get in and out of your wheelchair, that system was there for you. The bathrooms were designed so I could pull up under the sink. Just think about every single little aspect. All the doors had bang bars, which I don't know if you're familiar with a bang bar.
I
But
think so.
it's just sort of a long piece of metal that runs the height of the wall that you can just drive into. And it's designed so that, no matter where your foot plate is or on the wheelchair, you can still hit that thing and it'll open the doors. Um, so it was, not only was the physical space adapted for us, but they had sort of a what I it sounds almost institutionalized, but they had a 24-hour floater was their title. Somebody that worked on the floor that could do small tasks for you. So think about like open a can of soda, move a book, put something in your backpack, help you get a jacket on. Um, all the things that take like under 5 minutes of time that you would otherwise somebody like myself would have to hire somebody to be there to help me doing. So that in and of itself is a major safety net. Imagine, your caregiver is sick and they can't get you out of bed in the morning. That person could come and at least get you into your wheelchair and make sure that, if you needed to run to class, you looked presentable enough to do so. Um, and that was something that for myself, I noticed really quickly, um, was a powerful safety net. But I also started to feel like as time went on, I lived there for 2 years, 2 semester, no, 2 years, freshman and sophomore year. And what I quickly realized when I looked around at how people were using the program and the space, um, and then beyond once they graduated school, that program in some ways acted like a ceiling for folks. You're not navigating a caregiver not showing up and getting you out of bed and having to understand what that does for your day to day because there's that safety net there. You're not having to go find every caregiver. They, curate a list of folks that they've deemed could be caregivers and provide that to you every semester. So there's all these little redundancies, if you will, that were built into that dorm. And, when I started to realize this, I thought to myself, um, you know, this is an opportunity for me to take the harder path, to make that harder decision, like I talked about at the beginning. And so that's what really pushed me to take a leap of faith completely outside of my comfort zone junior year and go live on my own. I've gotten an apartment, I had roommates, did the whole college thing away from the dorm like most kids did. And it was not an easy thing to do, right? Like I had situations where there were days that people didn't show up. I was the one doing the hiring, doing the firing, doing the training, um, managing conflict, like all of the different things that you can think of when you're managing a team. I was doing, the day I got to college essentially. And it was easy for that first 2 years because I had that system there. But then when I got out of it, I was having to learn all of that myself and um, learn I did.
Um, well, now that I know, I mean, it's crazy that I know this, but no one else knows this yet. But you then took a job in college as well?
Yeah, yeah. So, like many people, didn't have a lot of financial backing. From my family, we were still in the thick of it. When I went away to college, imagine that's 4 years after the crash. So, we were still building and rebuilding. And I knew that like if I was gonna survive and have the things that I needed, I was gonna have to have a job. And so I um got one my first month of school. I don't know, kind of how it all happened, but found a job at the Department of Human Services. And it was really interesting in the sense that not only was I hiring my own caregivers at the time, but I was hiring caregivers for community members around me. And many of them weren't, people with disabilities. Many of them were just elderly folks that relied on social services, that social safety net, to really, help them do the things that they needed to do. So I think that was kind of the beauty of it was kind of this really beautiful meld where I was learning for that job, but also learning for myself. And I think that that's how I grew in that job quickly too, was them understanding that, I brought a unique lens to that role, having, been on the other side of that table. So for me, it was, really understanding, um, what do I need to do to survive in college? And then just going and doing it.
Mm.
Yeah.
You shared the stat with me. 95% of people in your situation after college move back home and never get a job. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
and why do you think that happens? Is it kind of what you're talking about with the dorm that gives you everything you need? It's they don't ever really learn to be fully capable in terms of managing their care and they're not really ever able to become adult, I guess you would say.
You know, it's a couple different things. So I think you hit the nail on the head. There's this structural component to it, where there's certain things you need to navigate a world that's not built for you, and one of those is the benefit side, right? So the interesting thing about living in America, is that we we do a good job. I'm not going to say a great job. We do a good job at providing adults with disabilities the services they need to survive. Um, I think that's where it ends, though. There's all these benefits cliffs that are associated with receiving them. One of the most prohibitive one is the income threshold. And I think this is the biggest problem that adults with disabilities face after college, because they are starting to make this calculation of, can I, if number one, will I earn enough money to be off the benefit system, which in America is around $56,000. So if you're graduating from a 4-year college and you're going to make less than 56 grand, um, that's that. And maybe you will, stay on the benefit system. Most college kids won't. I would assume that leaving a school like University of Illinois, I'm sure there's a stat out there about what people make, but I'm sure it's over $56,000. And once you earn over that threshold, they don't provide you your caregiver support. And for somebody like myself, um, that that was a very difficult, challenging problem to face. Because you go, all right, if I'm now making $80,000 a year, but my care is costing me $40,000 or more per year, what am I gonna do? Am I gonna be in debt my whole life and try to work probably twice as hard as my peers, but get half in return or less? Or am I going to take the safe route, which is to, not work, but have those social services provided to me so I don't have to struggle and I don't have to worry about um, whether or not I pay my caregiver or I have dinner tonight. All those really challenging questions that you start thinking about. I think that's the biggest component that prohibits people from going and working, and going home or, moving into a low rent apartment and staying on the social system. I think the other part of it, and this part I think is overlooked and might be the most controversial thought I have. But I also think it's sort of that humanistic perspective where people around them set low expectations for them. Um, and they say, we're really excited that you went and you got your degree. That's great. Like, now you're good. Without pushing them and saying, you got your degree, now what are you gonna go do with it? Right. And so I think, there's this structural component, but then there's this human component of, people setting low expectations for you. Plus, there's this exhaustion tax of knowing you're going to be working twice as hard as anyone else, and you may not get very far by doing so.
Mm.
So, what's going to be the easier route? It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's something I've never thought of. The other thing I want to just touch on, I actually worked 5 years in social services,
Mm-hmm.
granting Medi-Cal, EBT, food
Right.
stamps,
Nice.
whatever you want to call it, in
Yeah.
Northern California. And I don't think many Americans realize how the system works until they're in a really bad situation, or
Right.
they're not in a bad situation, but they think they are. On their when they look at their paycheck, they think they're poor, but
Right.
according to the state, no, you're not.
Right. Right.
And you're not getting anything, but they're in that weird spot where it's like they can't pay for their own health care, the state's not going to do it, and so you're just kicked out on the street in a way.
Right.
And so I've had lots of difficult conversations, especially around medical stuff with people explaining thresholds and eligibility, and it's, they want to yell at you and say, how can you do this? And it's like, they set these numbers and we have to follow these guidelines, and it's terrible. And the other element of that is there's so many people that have zero savings, and so when life hits them hard, it really hits them hard
Oh,
and
yeah.
can wipe them out and put them in debt and make them homeless and all those things. And I think it's kind of like talking about death. No one wants to talk about it, and we all avoid, but we're all going to die, and we all might have a hardship, and we might all end up there. So you should be aware of these things to some degree.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. No, it's hard. And, I think that's a conversation that I want young adults with disabilities to think about much earlier in life. Um, let's be real. Like, to your point, let's have real talk about the type of degree you're going to need to earn, to have a job that's going to pay you to live a normal, independent life. And let's have those real conversations, because I think there's degrees that people with adults should not be getting, unless they understand the trade-off they're making, right? And I think that those are really difficult conversations to have, because you don't want somebody who is just passionate about something to let that passion go. But I think there's ways that we can have that conversation that helps folks go, huh, maybe there's a different way I can leverage my passion, by getting a different type of degree, by getting a different type of job that's going to allow me to then live a fruitful life doing the things I love with the people I love, while not struggling as much. And I think that that's a conversation that is just not happening today. I think, to my point earlier, it's the low expectations bar that we set for people with disabilities. It's like, go get a degree, you'll be good. And I just don't think that's the reality, unfortunately.
yeah, I was lucky enough to I went to community college, then I transferred to a four-year university, and I did it as cheaply as possible. And of course, had some help from my mom saving some money. Actually, my dad never even knew about this money, and so that helped me get through it. And I also worked through college as well.
Okay.
But and I have a degree in psychology, which is worthless, and I never really applied it. But that's what I was passionate about at the time.
Yeah.
The thing that makes me angry, though, about college degrees, and I think it's gotten even worse now, and I would have a hard time convincing my own son to go to college unless it's something he knows for sure that he can make money. Because
Mm,
going to school in America, you're possibly putting handcuffs on yourself for like 10, 20 years because of this college debt you put yourself in.
right.
And then you might not actually work anywhere relevant to what you got your degree in. And I know so many people I've talked to over the years that didn't live their life the way they wanted because they had this debt, and they didn't go travel, or like, oh, I wish I could have lived my life like you, but I couldn't because I had to immediately go into the workforce and start paying the man back. And it just
Right.
makes me so angry for people
Yep.
that it's very American, but they just cripple us with debt as a child,
Yeah.
18 years old. Here, sign a piece of paper, and you could be $100,000 in debt, and then in 4 years' time,
Yep. Yep.
and then you're stuck into the system. So it makes me very mad, and especially when then you hear someone gets like a really silly degree that underwater basket weaving or something, whatever it is. It's just it's upsetting to me that we allow this to be done to children, really, even though we
Hmm.
treat them as adults.
Right. Yeah. It's a system that's designed to make money, right? For a
Yep.
certain small group of folks, and the rest of us are, left trying to figure it out afterwards.
We're the busy bees making the
Yeah.
honey for them. How has your over the years, the different caretakers that have been in your life, how have they helped you live the life that you want to live?
Man, we could be here for like an hour if I talk about that. I think to summarize my caregiving teams over the years, I will never be able to repay them. What they've done for me. They've been the unsung heroes of every single chapter of my life. From the very beginning, you think about, my parents getting me from birth to age 18, and then now I'm off in the world and figuring all of that out on my own. As much as I have learned from them and employing them and hiring them, I think uh, I hopefully they've let them learn something from me along the way. I can think of a couple folks specifically when I was in college who, I employed them and they had no idea what they were doing, right? This was their first job. This was their first caregiving job. It's a whole different world, right? You're hiring somebody to take care of you in your most vulnerable position, right? Whether it's getting you dressed, whether it's, seeing you on your bad days, they're around. And so for me, I think what I learned early on was I'm gonna hire for character first, and I can develop the skills later. Right? And so, I've taken that approach every time I've made a hire. It's been my first filter as I want to understand, who they are, what makes them trustworthy or not. Are they gonna be somebody who can deal with a world that requires you to be flexible, and agile. Maybe, like we don't all go to the bathroom at the same time every day. But for a lot of us with disabilities, like we kind of plan those schedules that way. So there's all these layers to it. And, I think no matter what degree you earn, whether it's an MBA, a doctorate, none of that prepares you for being an 18-year-old managing a team of 12 caregivers. While also trying to figure out how to be a college student, while also trying to figure out how to have a job, right? There's all these layers to it. And so, I was basically running an HR function at age 20. And I think for me, what's been the most rewarding thing is learning all these different ways to get people to work together, finding creative ways to keep folks retained for multiple years, finding creative ways to build, a team environment where the team doesn't typically see each other. They might see each other as a shift overlaps, but otherwise, they're not working side by side the other caregivers I employ. And so finding ways to bring folks together, whether it's going to a music festival, taking a road trip, doing different things that create that sense of, community for them while also helping me make it from one day to the next and one stage to the next and one chapter to the next. I think it takes a different type of person to be able to do that. And I think that's it's not to go all the way back to, folks that move home after college, but, you have to be comfortable leading and having hard conversations. I can think back to times in the dorm where, I would have um, people that lived down the hall from me that had a caregiver that was, not showing up for them the right way or not communicating with them. And, having conversations with that other disabled person to say, this is your life. Like, you have to own it. You have to have those conversations. And I promise you that when you have those conversations, that relationship will still be there. Um, it's all about how you approach those.
Um, as I'm about to ask this question, I'm thinking if someone asked the question to me, how I would answer it, and
Mm,
I'm struggling to even
Okay.
It could be multiple people really, or it could be a certain era of your life or a year of your life or whatever. But who has inspired you most in your life?
Wow. That's a great question. Um, there was a gentleman I met with my disability at a very young age. He was about 10 years older than me, and I met him at a Borders bookstore in Batavia, Illinois, because him and his sister, who had spinal muscular atrophy, had written a book together. They were in high school at the time. I was probably still in elementary school. Um, but I made a point to network with that guy, and stay close to him, throughout his life. And he was somebody who, um, just inspired me every day. He did things that people doubted he was going to be able to do. He started a record label at 20 years old. Um, he was managing a medium-sized business at age 30 years old. He was somebody who never took no for an answer. Whether that was to his demise in sometimes or not, but he was one of those people. His name is Stevie Hopkins. He changed, I think, the trajectory of my life. So when we think back to that conversation around mindset, he was one of the first people I saw with my disability who just embraced it and let it fuel him and let it empower not only himself but all the people around him. And he also went to the school that I went to, University of Illinois, and was a part of the Beckwith program as well. And, I remember when I was applying to schools, my parents both went to University of Iowa. So it was super controversial for me to want to go anywhere else. And I had applied to University of Iowa and got in, and I had gotten waitlisted at Illinois. And I remember him saying, I'll never forget the conversation. He called me out of the blue and he said, I heard you were waitlisted. Don't give up. Stick with it. Email people, communicate that that's where you need to go. Because if you don't go there, the rest of your life will look different. And that conversation like pushed me to like go after figuring out who was the director of the program. Could I have a conversation with them? What did I need to do to get in? Because if he was telling me that, like, it was a big deal. And I can't thank him anymore because he's no longer with us. And neither is his sister, but he was one of those people that just he changed the trajectory probably of my life.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm so happy you found someone like that in your life.
Yeah,
Um,
I try to be that person for other people with my disability. I don't get to. We have an annual SMA conference every year. I don't get to it as often as I would like to, but when I do, I try to speak there and just network with younger folks and say, what are you up to? What does your day to day look like? Um, how are your parents pushing you? And just having those conversations because, if they don't have somebody that's willing to have those hard conversations with them and they could use somebody that has a wheelchair and a disability like theirs to give them that advice or to be that voice in the back of their head. That's what I wanna be for those folks.
Definitely. And the more I think about it, you really don't have, there's no cultural. I don't think I can't think of like a TV show that you would watch and be like, oh, I relate to this character, or a movie. I mean, you probably
Right,
do,
right.
but there's probably very very few. So it's amazing that you can pass it on to kids, in your situation as well, because it's probably just they will have that same memory as you did for him,
Yeah,
and so that's powerful stuff that you can keep that going.
Yeah, absolutely.
If someone is sitting in their own version of a comfortable path, which I think a lot of people are, they're choosing the easy mode in their life, what would you say to them?
Um, First thing would be to wake up. There's a world around you, and staying in your comfortable zone is going to keep you pretty sheltered to all the cool stuff that's out there. I think when I look back and I think about the disabled dorm um, being that safety net for me, and then what my life could potentially look like today if I hadn't said I'm gonna take the less route, the route less traveled, or whatever the saying is.
Yep.
I think every circumstance that happened after that has made me who I am. It's made me the leader I am. It's made me as well versed in HR world as I've become. And, if I had chosen that easier path, I don't think I'd be here today with you. I don't think we would be having this conversation. I don't think, the organizations that I've been so fortunate to work for, and that have embraced somebody that doesn't look like everyone else in the room. Those are the opportunities that came from taking that harder path. And I think that everyone deserves the best life that they can get. And I think when we think about how we support each other in all the times of technology change and economic uncertainty and political discourse, having those hard conversations with each other is what we should be doing. And that's how I think we're going to continue to make sure that we stay connected to the human experience, and just be mindful of that around us. I think it's so easy for us to get caught up in our phone world where we're doom scrolling and we've lost the ability to just have a conversation when we're in rooms with each other. Um, you know, you should be the one to design what your future looks like just by taking that harder pathway. And so I would just encourage everyone to think about life that way. When you're faced with the decision that has an easy route and a hard route, just stop. Like, stop in your tracks and say, what are the trade-offs I'm making? Have conversations with folks. Do some research before you decide that the easy route's what you want. For some folks, that's the right decision to make. And it's going to keep them, um, in their homes. It's going to have the support services that they need. And I don't want this to sound like this conversation to sound like I'm talking bad mouthing those folks, because I think in many situations there's so many layers to it where, if I'm somebody who has a different type of physical disability, that maybe the longevity of my life is going to look differently than mine. Maybe you do take the easy route, knowing that there's a finite time that you're gonna have to do things, and you know enjoy the time while you have it. But I also think that there's that opportunity factor in the unknown and in the hard space where you're uncomfortable and where you're really pushing yourself. So just have that conversation. Take the time and think about it before you go one way or another, and believe in your gut. Most importantly, I think there's that gut instinct in all of us, and I think that it's one of those superpowers that we often like overlook. And so lean into that.
Yeah. I think everyone should try to just live a life with no regrets, because that's the worst. If you wake up 20 years from now and you go, man, why didn't I do that thing? Because,
Right.
you know, you could be in a completely different situation.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would you like people to reach out to you if they want to talk to you about anything on LinkedIn, or is there an organization, or is there anything you would like to plug?
Yeah, I mean, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I am an HR professional first and foremost. I am a nerd around data. So if you're a data nerd in the HR space, like let's talk. If you're into AI, and you're playing with the agentic side of Claude, let's talk. I love that type of stuff. If you're interested in learning more about my disability or others, Muscular Dystrophy Association is one of the most broadly sort of held nonprofits in the US that supports every type of physical disability out there. They're a great organization to look into and support. And lastly, if you are a nerd and you want to like write with me, I've started a side passion project where it's just practitioners writing about what we're nerding out about. So if it's performance management and how you redesigned a process, how you build an agent, like let's talk about that too.
Okay, that's a lot. I hope many people reach out. I really appreciate your time telling your story. This was amazing, Drew, and thanks for coming onto the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dustin.